It looks like we're streaming live on YouTube. Okay, Brendan, are we good to go?
We're good to go.
Great, thank you. Okay, good evening, everybody. Great to see you all digitally on this actually nice and cool August evening, if you haven't been outside yet. So welcome to the August 23rd, 2021 meeting of the CB6 Land Use and Waterfront Committee. My name is Adam Herkey, and I am the chair of the Land Use and Waterfront Committee. This meeting is called to order at 6:32 p.m. Tonight, we are joined by District Manager Jesus Perez and Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth. In the interest of public health, the Executive Committee of Manhattan Community Board 6 has decided to conduct meetings virtually, streamed and recorded online for maximum participation and safety of board members and the public. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you may have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there is time following the committee discussion, we will field questions from the public. Okay, I know this meeting's been rescheduled a few times, so we need a member to take minutes this evening. So do I have any volunteers to take minutes? Please don't all volunteer at once. Pretty please. I'll send you virtual donuts. Okay.
I can do it.
All right.
Adam.
Thanks, Sandy. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Some virtual donuts for Sandy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So just as a reminder, we're getting into the fall. So I know we had sort of the summer off, but if you could please fill out the doodle poll to volunteer for minutes going forward in September. I know things have kind of been a little crazy, to say the least, in terms of scheduling and whatnot for these meetings, but really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, so with that said, we're going to go ahead and take attendance. Okay, Brendan, will you please conduct the roll call?
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. If your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Adam Hartkey.
Present.
Molly Hollis.
Here.
Kavitha Matthew.
Here.
Sandy McKee.
Here.
Wells McGalley.
Here.
Gene Santoro.
Here.
Larry Shire.
Here.
Ann Seligman.
She's not here this evening.
Lou Sapersky. I did see Lou on.
I saw him. Maybe
Yep.
he's having trouble unmuting himself.
Yep, I see Lou on, so Lou is counted as present.
I didn't get you.
Yeah.
Are you muted?
Yeah.
Are you?
Oh, now you're unmuted.
Sandra Sherrod.
Present.
Letty Simon.
Here.
And Kathy Thompson. I do not see Kathy here, but we do have quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brendan. Okay. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the Zoom, or excuse me, members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Okay, seeing no objection, the agenda is adopted. All right, the meeting minutes. The minutes from the May 24th meeting were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom.
Larry has his hand raised.
Larry?
Yes, there's a place near the beginning of the minutes which references an inquiry which I made, and I think it needs clarification. that I am referring to the passageway to Madison Avenue from the waiting area in
Okay.
Grand Central Terminal.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and just go ahead and email the office your correction and we'll incorporate it in the minutes.
Okay, fine.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so incorporating Larry's edit. If there are no objections, the meeting minutes for the May 24th meeting are adopted. Okay, so let's set some ground rules. It has been a while. May 24th feels like an eternity ago. Different sort of roller coaster of emotions in many ways, but it's good to have you all back here virtually. And so with that said, the meeting rules that we've had since spring of 2020 still apply this evening. So with that said, no one may speak until granted the floor. I will grant you the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you need help locating the raised hand function, please reach out to Brendan. The chat function, please do not use the chat function. Please do not use the chat function. Please do not use the chat function. If you have any sort of questions that you would like to address, please use the question and answer function. And if there is time permitting, we will answer your question. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you. You can unmute yourself so that you may speak. Okay, and so let's get into committee business. And so I'd like to thank the office, for organizing tonight's meeting. Let's say that there was a fine-tuned ballet in terms of meeting logistics. And so we definitely came a long way, and it's good to see you all here this evening. And so with that said, we really only have one item on the agenda tonight. And that's the public hearing on the proposed citywide zoning text amendment, which would remove Article 1, Chapter 4, and all the text related to Sidewalk Cafe regulations from the zoning resolution. With that said, we have team members from the Department of Transportation and the Department of City Planning to present to us the proposed changes. With that said,
Public hearing must be declared open.
That's right. Sorry. Okay. The public hearing for a citywide zoning text amendment application number N210434ZRY is now open. If any members of the public want to speak on this matter, please indicate in the Q&A feature, and you will be granted the ability to speak on a first come, first served basis. You will have up to 3 minutes to speak. I'll reiterate the ground rules once we get to that point. But basically how tonight's meeting is going to function is that the reps from the city agencies will provide their presentation. The committee members will ask questions, and then we will then open it up to the public. And then once that is done, we will then close the hearing, submit the, and then with that said, we would then enter a business period where the committee will debate whether or not they want to pass a resolution, and then we'll vote on it subsequently. Okay. With that said, I turn it over to the Department of City Planning and the Department of Transportation team. The floor is now yours.
Just to start to interrupt, but the public hearing hasn't officially been closed.
Right, it just opened.
Correct. But I thought we were supposed to give a couple of moments for any members of the public to
Brendan, we're going to hear the presentation first, and then members of the public will have an opportunity to speak.
Right. Okay.
Hi, it's Colleen Chattergoon from City Department of Transportation. Can you guys hear me?
We can, Colleen. Good to hear from you.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. So first of all, I want to thank you for holding the virtual meeting with DOT and Department of City Planning. I see a lot of familiar faces, especially my buddy Lou Sapersky. We go way, way back. Hello, Lou.
Hello.
I wanted to say that with the open restaurant program, we're here tonight, along with our colleagues from Department of City Planning, to give this presentation and to answer questions that you may have about the program. My colleague, Jackie Lazaro, who is from the Manhattan Borough Commissioner's Office, along with myself, will give the presentation. And again, we're here to answer any questions that you may have, okay? And then DCP will also do their part. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you for that introduction. So good evening, everyone. So I just want to confirm, Brendan, should I pull up the presentation or can CV2 or sorry, CV6 do that? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. Okay, so tonight we are gathered here to discuss the Permanent Open Restaurants Program. And if you could please hit to the next slide. I don't think the slides are changing.
Aska, can you advance the slide, please?
They're advanced on mine. I think maybe there's a delay. Let me end full screen.
Okay, perfect. Now we do the slides changing. If you could start on slide 2, please.
Is it not advancing?
It's on slide 4. Okay, perfect. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so for the next few minutes, I'll be taking us through where things stand from a more programmatic standpoint with the permanent open restaurants, which will continue to give restaurants the opportunity to, give restaurants the option of sidewalk and roadway seating for outdoor dining. The program will look to better balance the many needs of the street and sidewalk, keeping both restaurants and other users in mind. And we're going to take what has worked and what hasn't worked in the past, both pre-COVID and now during the emergency program, when developing the future guidelines. I want to make it clear that while this presentation will cover both sidewalk and roadway dining, DOT and city planning are asking the board for their opinion on the specific Sidewalk Cafe text amendment. Next slide. As you know, the city had street and sidewalk cafes before COVID, but far fewer of them. The majority of the programs were administered by the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. DOT did run one small pilot of public roadway seating, which we called street seats, but there were only 25 setups, mostly in Manhattan. Our understanding is that the relatively low participation was in large part due to the cost and process. Next slide, please. During COVID, the city suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order, and DOT was directed to create the Open Restaurants Program, allowing restaurants to conduct their business in the public right-of-way. Since the launch about 1 year ago, over 11,000 restaurants have participated, which helped save about 100,000 jobs. By many accounts, this program has been a lifesaver, not just to the restaurant industry, but also to the city that has seen outdoor dining and the incredible vitality it can bring to our sidewalks and streets as a beacon of hope and innovation in a dark time, a sign that our city can imagine a better future. Next slide. Of course, there have been successes and challenges over the past year. We've learned both positive and negative lessons in that time, and those lessons are critical to informing how we proceed with a permanent program. On the positive side, we think that the robust use of the emergency program was helped by three things. First, unlike the pre-emergency Sidewalk Cafe program, no geographies were off limits. Any restaurant with ground floor frontage and sidewalk or roadway space that met the criteria could participate. Second, the program was free and easy to access, unlike the pre-COVID Sidewalk Cafe program, which required months of multiple reviews by multiple agencies. And third, the element of roadway dining gave brand new options to restaurants, particularly those that might not have enough room on the sidewalk to accommodate a cafe. It is also worth noting a few lessons learned from the emergency program. First, the speed of the rollout and the fact that the program was built from scratch under emergency circumstances created some confusion. As DOT learned more about operating a program like this, and the program was extended by the mayor into the winter, some of the guidance had to change along the way to keep everyone safe. Second, throughout the program, DOT learned more about the challenges specific to the roadway seating and its interaction with the roadway. For instance, we've heard from other agencies such as FDNY and MTA that there were issues with turning radiuses and city signs being blocked. Safety is of the utmost importance here and will remain so. So we will continue to work with our agency partners on that. Third, enforcement has been complicated on multiple fronts. On the one hand, you have restaurants that are who are dealing with a lot and who felt squeezed and over-inspected by too many different people. On the other hand, you had some communities, particularly the mobility impaired, concerned about under-enforcement. Next slide, please. That being said, the program has seen tremendous participation, and in April, the City Council overwhelmingly voted in favor of the bill to make it permanent. This requires changing a number of different laws that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a bit about what we're proposing for the permanent program and then return to the topic of the legal changes needed to effectuate it. But to start, we anticipate that as in the emergency program, DOT will administer a permanent option for both sidewalk seating and roadway seating with similar rules to current sidewalk cafes, but available citywide. We want to be sensitive to the traveling public, minding sidewalk clear paths and other rules around sound and hours of operation. Next slide, please. When final specific design guidelines will be very clear and will revolve around these principles that balance the use of sidewalk space by a restaurant, but maximize the experience of openness and activation to the general public. For most of the city, we're proposing requiring 8 feet clear paths or half the sidewalk width, whichever is greater. In some areas with higher foot traffic, the city is proposing 12 feet or half the sidewalk width. And for other special cases where it may still make sense despite a narrow sidewalk, we're looking at a waiver to go down to 8 feet, which would be co-reviewed by the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities. Next slide. Switching gears, we think that the introduction of the roadway option is a tremendous new opportunity for restaurants, especially those who may have had narrow sidewalks. The city is considering on how this will be set up permanently, but we will have setups in parking lanes, except in prohibited zones, maintain public safety, have clear guidance and enforcement on sound, and comply with ADA requirements. In the future, any roadway setups will look a lot more like what's on this slide, not the fully enclosed structure that we've seen a lot of. Next slide. The city is proposing that the new program will not operate during the colder months, but with some opportunity for a hardship waiver that would allow restaurants to keep their setups in place. For now, all restaurants will be able to keep operating uninterrupted through this upcoming winter season. Next slide. In looking at both moving the legal authority to run the program to DOT and in creating new processes for the roadway setup, the city is looking to streamline the review process as much as possible while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. Next slide. To make this permanent program a reality, 3 steps are needed to advance. First, the focus for today is the removal of locational prohibitions through zoning. It's key to unlocking the full citywide universe for applicability and consolidating control and accountability for the program under a single agency. We are also working with the City Council, who strongly support this program, to enact appropriate legislation, which will update the laws governing sidewalk cafes, and then create a new set of laws and rules to govern roadway cafes. Next slide. Following zoning and legal changes, we anticipate rulemaking that formalizes many of the program's design and application details, and then a formal opening of the application window for a new program. Though we are beginning a process of developing the future program, the current emergency program is expected to be in effect as is for the next 1.5 years or so. The expectation is that restaurants will have ample time to transition into a new process if they so choose to, with minimal operational disruption. Changing zoning is the first critical step to making this program permanent. But as you can see on the timeline, there are multiple steps to developing the program. Each step welcomes public input and review. Next slide. COVID-19 has really shaped the way. COVID-19 has really shaped the way New Yorkers think about how our streets can be used, which has been a silver lining to the pandemic. We welcome feedback and encourage all to visit our website to submit that to us as we develop all of the elements. Once again, the roadway portion of this presentation is preliminary, and our primary purpose in presenting to the board tonight is to gather feedback on DCP's proposed text amendment changes, specifically related to sidewalk cafes. With that in mind, I'll turn it back to DCP to talk about those changes.
Thank you, Jackie, for that context and background. And good evening, everyone. Always great to be back at CB6. And thank you so much for convening this meeting. We really appreciate you inviting us to hear about this project. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Jose Truccio, Scott Williamson, and Benjamin Huff. We will be going over the presentation, a brief overview of the zoning text amendment that is proposing to make permanent and regulate the open restaurants program. If you want to hear information about anything we present today, you can stay for questions, and anything we can't answer today, we can follow up as well later. What we're asking for is your recommendations for the City Planning Commission about this proposal. I'll now turn it over to Jose to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Aska. Hi, everyone. I'm Jose Truccio, and like Aska mentioned, we will now transition to the zoning text amendment, which our DOT colleagues discuss is one element of facilitating a permanent open restaurants program. Just a quick reminder, what is in front of the community board today is actually the proposal for removing the Chapter 4 of the General Resolution of the zoning text amendment for removing the restrictions of the actual restaurants. Hold on. Can I, next slide, please. As previously discussed, there are 3 main legal processes to create a permanent open restaurants program. The first, which is the focus for the rest of the presentation, the removal of location prohibitions by a text amendment. Unnecessary zoning restrictions stand in the way of thousands of restaurants from participating in outdoor dining past the emergency order. This zoning proposal is key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability and consolidating control and accountability for the program under a single agency, which will be the Department of Transportation. Next slide. The proposed text amendment will remove the entirety of Chapter 1, Article 4 of the zoning resolution and related text in special districts and other areas that related to the sidewalk cafes to fully remove zoning from dictating locations of where cafes can be located and operate. This will allow any restaurant to apply to DOT for a sidewalk cafe if they can meet the required clear path and siting criteria. Next slide. Just to add a bit of context, in March 2020, there were roughly 27,000 restaurants in the 5 boroughs. 42% of these restaurants are in Manhattan. These restaurants range from small neighborhood cafes to more mid-sized high-end dining establishments, and also multi-level catering halls for large events. For the purpose of this presentation, we will be focusing on ground floor restaurants with access to the street, as these are the restaurants that had the ability to apply for the sidewalk cafe. Next slide. Sidewalk cafes have long been a part of New York City streetscape, and within the laws governing cafes have evolved over the years. When ULURP came into existence in the 1970s, cafe approvals were subjected to a full ULURP review as part of its revocable consent to use the street space. Almost immediately, it was recognized that this level of review was complicated, time-consuming, and difficult to manage for each individual restaurant. So in the 1980s, the commission put in place a framework attempted to streamline the process by naming areas of the city where sidewalk cafes were allowed. Since then, the program has been amended dozens of times to make more sense and more fine granular distinctions on where and when, what kind of cafes are allowed in different areas. Up until COVID-19, Sony worked as a gatekeeper of where sidewalk cafes could exist. Next slide. Under the zoning rules, which are currently suspended, zoning dictates 3 different kinds of cafes and where in the city they can be located. Most commonly, an enclosed cafe, which allows for readily removable tables, chairs, and fencing, with no allowable overhead coverage other than umbrellas or retractable roofs. A small sidewalk cafe is an enclosed sidewalk cafe containing no more than a single row of tables and chairs adjacent to the street line and can extend no farther than 4.5 feet from the building. Or an enclosed cafe, which is financed extensions of the building into the sidewalk using light and building materials. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, Sony held the geographic restrictions of where these cafes were allowed. By visiting DCP zoning and land use map tool, SOLA, the public can view where cafes were allowed today. Yellow allows only small cafe size. Purple are areas where only unenclosed and small cafes are allowed. And green is where all types of cafes were allowed. Importantly, you can see a lot of the areas where cafes were not allowed at all. Even if these sidewalks were wide and conditions otherwise will have allowed it. Red is the areas specifically prohibited from having cafes, and blue is all the residential areas of the city. Next slide. In March 2020, the Assistant Department of Consumers and Worker Protection, formerly known as the Department of Consumer Affairs, or DCAS, program had over 1,000 cafes actively licensed in the citywide, mostly unenclosed, and the vast majority located in Manhattan, as you can see in this graph. Next slide. As a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, New York State economy went on pause. And in March 2020, this action resulted in a ban of indoor dining that impacted the industry harshly. We saw employment in the restaurant industry drop by 60% from Q1 to Q2 in 2020, with the majority of these losses in Manhattan. Sadly, the city also lost some long-time institutions in the past year as continued restrictions and aversions of indoor dining made it very difficult for dining establishments to operate. Next slide. In order to provide support for the restaurant industry and the need to move dining outdoor, New York City stood up an open restaurants program that allowed for the emergency use of sidewalk and roadways by restaurants. This was achieved by suspending zoning and rules through executive order that allowed restaurants to conduct outdoor dining in the public right-of-way. All zoning regulations and admin code rules related to the Sidewalk Cafe program were suspended, and an emergency self-certified program was set up at DOT. Street sweeping rules were scaled back and restaurants were allowed to set up in the curb lane to provide additional seating. Restaurants could go to the website of DOT created to apply for a sidewalk cafe, roadway cafe, or both. Next slide. And so today, over 11,000 restaurants are participating in the Open Restaurants program. In particular, the city saw a huge surge of outdoor dining occur in the outer boroughs. 10,000 of the restaurants use the sidewalk for their outdoor dining setup. Next slide. We have seen the challenges that New York City restaurant industry has faced from COVID-19, and Open Restaurants has essentially has been essential to them to survive in the past year. An estimated 100,000 jobs has been saved by this program. The industry still has challenges ahead, but Open Restaurants has been able to provide the twin benefit of both helping small businesses flourish while also making New York City streets and sidewalks some of the best dining options in the world. Next slide. During the emergency program, 2,500 restaurants were permitted in areas that would have been prohibited or limited under the existing zoning. But the proposed text amendment will allow them to keep operating. Looking at the map on the right, in red are restaurants in specific areas that are prohibited by zoning. These include commercial meat blocks, certain special districts under the elevated red lines, other named congested areas. In blue are all the grandfather restaurants in residential areas. Zoning doesn't allow restaurants in residential areas, but many of these uses predate zoning and so have remained. We estimate there are about almost 3,000 restaurants citywide and 1,000 participating in the Open Restaurants program. Yellow are cafes in zones that will have limited to this small cafe typology only. Next slide. There are many reasons why these areas were prohibited, but what we have seen is that cafes can work in many more locations than zoning contemplated. Just look at a picture of the cafe in Bushwick as a great example. What's more important is the sidewalk condition and having enough room for pedestrians. And that's a siting criteria, not a neighborhood criteria. So we really think the zoning is not working and the physical rules will be better applicable to this program. Next slide. Dumbo is a special district that specifically does not allow sidewalk cafes, but we have seen some great examples of restaurants doing outdoor dining during the emergency program. This proposal will allow restaurants to apply as long as they can meet the siting criteria. All special districts will be eligible. Next slide. Blocks around Grand Central are barred from having sidewalk cafes by zoning, and these restaurants will not have been allowed to have sidewalk cafes. Under these proposals, restaurants in central business districts will need to meet a 12-feet clear path requirement to allow for more pedestrian traffic, but will be allowed to participate as long as they can meet these additional requirements. Next slide. The previous were examples of areas where zoning explicitly barred restaurants from participating. Another gap in the Sidewalk Cafe program is restaurants in residential districts. In many cases, we know restaurants wanted to have sidewalk cafes in these areas and will request zoning overlays to legalize them. This proposal will eliminate that burden. This proposal will not allow new restaurants from occurring in these residential areas as of right, but it will allow restaurants that exist in these areas to apply for a sidewalk cafe. Next slide. Also to note that a consequence of removing the zoning rules is we're also collapsing these different types of cafe. So the distinction of an only small cafe zone will be removed, and this will work in conjunction with supplemental clear path requirements that will address the need for wider pedestrian zones in some of the city's most trafficked locations. Next slide. And finally, ending the zoning program effectively ends the specific category in zoning called the Enclosed Cafe Program. This program served a specific purpose pre-pandemic for a joint DCP, DCWP review of sidewalk cafes with particular conditions, which no longer be necessary or applicable in the context of the future permanent program in the development at DOT. There are currently 102 pre-COVID enclosed cafes licensed, and those will be grandfathered and allowed to continue to operate. Next slide. Other cleanup actions in the text amendment include removing definitions and cross-reference to cafes, removing text that precludes operable windows that service outdoor restaurants, and ensuring that no enclosure provisions require a restaurant to be fully indoors as a condition of the zoning district, and clarifying sidewalk widening text to ensure it does not conflict with the operation of the open restaurants program. Next slide. So let's zoom in Community Board 6. Community Board 6 has zoning rules that allow all cafes along 2nd Avenue and some parts of 3rd Avenue. This is the pre-existing. And small cafes only around Midtown East, reflecting generally the narrow sidewalks. Next slide. The old process generated a total of 66 total cafes. You got enclosed, there were 10, small unenclosed were 8, unenclosed cafes were 46, and regular unenclosed or small unenclosed were 2 of them. You have a sample here of Syria Laguna restaurant and East 42nd Avenue. Next slide. Under the emergency program restaurant, there are 334 cafes in Community Board 6. 88 of them will have been prohibited under the current zoning. You can see those again in the red and blue. The text amendment will allow these cafes the opportunity to apply in a non-emergency setting, but only if they meet the siting rules that DOT lays out. There's an example of Taco Vision, if I'm not mistaken, and located in 53rd Street. Next slide, please. So to summarize all, we are at the start of the multi-pronged legislative process. The text that's being referred out today will be referred to as 59 community boards and 5 board of presidents for 90 days. We expect the text to come back to the CPC this fall. We anticipate city council actions to be underway during the same period, continuing the process of updating the Sidewalk Cafe and fully fleshing out the Roadway Cafe authority throughout the rulemaking process, also underway during the summer. And informing part by community board consultations, we imagine will be a design review process. We do not expect full program launch until late 2022 or early 2023 at the earliest, which give us a lot of time for restaurants to transition to the permanent program should they choose to do so. And next slide. That's all for us tonight, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have, and those that we cannot answer, we are happy to come back to the community board with our response later on.
Great. Thank you very much, Jose. And thank you all to the presenting team. Very informative. Thank you. Let me just reiterate for the members of the public who are in attendance. Please, if you can, thank you those who have already. If you have any questions that you'd like to submit for public testimony, please, if you're going to do so, please post those in the Q&A function and not the chat. But however, since I'm talking about the chat, Jesus posted some very helpful rules in terms of how we will be conducting the portion for public comment. So you will have 3 minutes. We will call on you. You'll have 3 minutes. You can either write your question in the Q&A. I can read it aloud, and the team potentially can answer it, or you can just say it on the Zoom, and it will be noted in the public record. So thank you. Once we get back, so right now what we're going to do is the committee is going to ask questions of the team, and then we'll turn it over to the general public. I'll remind you of these rules once we get back to that portion. So thank you for your patience. Before I turn it over to the committee, I'd like to ask a clarifying question that will hopefully sort of set sort of the tone for some of the questions that are asked from others. So this evening, we're being asked to vote on a text amendment that will allow for a more simplified process than existed for sidewalk cafes and open restaurants than what had been before the pandemic. Open restaurants have been a hot topic, good, bad, and everything in between. And I think a lot of people have comments on this specifically in terms of the program as a whole and specifically how they're run. So it's my understanding is that once after this text amendment will be voted on, there will be a host of more permanent regulations and rules that will govern how these open restaurants operate. So I guess for simplicity's sake, rather than sort of us kind of ask about specific things, how far along are those rules and regulations? And when do you anticipate that sort of set of rules and regulations to be passed by the city council?
Hi, Adam.
Hey,
This is
Ben.
Ben Huff. I'm a senior project manager in the transportation division, and I've been the main project manager on the text amendment. And I just want to say thank you for that question. That's a really good question. We expect sort of in that timeline slide that Jose had showed earlier, and I think there was a timeline slide also on the DOT presentation. We are working on the text amendment now because that is the longest and most intensive process. There was an environmental review that was done that would be the impact of removing sidewalk cafe regulations from zoning. So that legwork was done and that's available. And, as that process is going forward, the zoning text amendment, right now we're in the public review process. We have been over the summer and we'll still be going to other community boards till the end of September. DOT will be rolling out more info on their design guidelines process very shortly. We're hoping this fall, as well as there'll be city council legislation drafted that will be made public and available for the public to review that will be focused on updating other parts of the sidewalk cafe program as it would shift from Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection over to DOT, sort of updating some different stuff, as well as creating the roadway cafe program.
So, sorry, just a quick follow-up. So in terms of like the design, you brought up design, right? So the DOT team wouldn't have any sort of specifics in terms of what they're thinking in terms of their design regs. That would be a few months from now, right?
So that's correct. It's Colleen. And
Okay.
we're going to have that information. And when we have that information, we'll share it with the community boards and it'll be public.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, all right. So with that said, I see Letty has her hand up. Letty, the floor is yours, and then followed by Larry. Letty?
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay, with regard to the design regs or will the public be able to comment while they're being drafted, or will we be presented these regs when they are done? Are we going to have input as they're developed?
So Letty, that's a good question. I'm going to have to confirm that and get back to the community board, but I'm sure it's guidelines that we're going to be putting together and we'll share it with the community board.
Okay, but we will not have any input in that other than to respond to what we're seeing. Is that it?
You know what? I'll have to confirm that and I can get back to the board about input into design.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Letty.
Sorry, Larry. I see that Sandy has her hand up, so I'm going to call on Sandy, and then I'm going to go back to you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the queue. I did wonder, once this is in place, what will be the involvement of city planning? Is there any involvement at all, or is this now completely taken over by the DOT?
Hi, Sandy. That's a good question. You are correct. So zoning acted as the gatekeeper. Basically, the process was before you could apply for a sidewalk cafe. Again, roadway cafes didn't exist really, at least as we see them in the emergency program, like prior to March 2020. But for the sidewalk cafe program, prior to submitting an application to what was then the Department of Consumer Affairs, is now Department of Consumer Workforce Protection, you had to have the appropriate zoning. And we had maintained that zoning, and as special districts were created or rezonings were done, we may have tinkered with where sidewalk cafes were allowed and where they weren't. So that was the first step, is you had to have the appropriate zoning before you could apply. I think what we learned from the emergency program is that cafes are more successful based on physical conditions of the site rather than strictly just zoning. And so we would like to remove zoning as that gatekeeper and focus instead on sort of the physical criteria, making sure the sidewalk's wide enough, that it's far away from important street infrastructure, and then work with that for a sidewalk cafe. So we will, yes, be removing city planning from that. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And I had one other question. The enclosed sidewalk cafes that we have now, will it be confirmed that they comply with the current requirements before they're grandfathered?
I think it will, if they were approved, so the enclosed cafes that are being grandfathered in had to have been licensed in March 2020 or earlier. So think of the historical sort of enclosed cafes that existed pre-COVID, if anyone can remember those. That's what will be grandfathered in, because they were legal at one point. And we will allow them to continue. We won't just take that away from them. They will still have to meet the requirements of the new program. And so there will be a very limited amount of restaurants. Anyone who had built an enclosed cafe during the emergency program wasn't supposed to, and probably had guidance to not do that, and may have even gotten written letters from the DOT, but we haven't sort of gone and enforced and made them take them down. But what will be grandfathered in will be those that had a sort of active or recently inactive license, had it approved by Department of Buildings and City Planning prior to COVID.
So even if they don't meet the new requirements, they will be allowed to keep their enclosure?
They likely will meet the new requirements, since the new requirements are based very similarly off the pre-existing sidewalk cafe program.
Ben, it would basically be like a code issue at that point, right? Like if they don't meet the code, then they couldn't operate.
Do you have an example, perhaps, on what you mean? Because I'm not sure. The enclosed cafes will be grandfathered in. Those that existed prior to COVID will be grandfathered into the new program. It's about 102 citywide. So I don't, I'm trying to think of something that would be updated that would preclude them. I mean, they likely met the clear path requirements that existed before. I know one thing is if they're abandoned for a long time, we expect eventually the building owners will be required to take them down.
Thank you.
Larry, the floor is yours, and then I see Sandra's hands up as well. So Sandra's after Larry.
Thank you. I want to focus on post-COVID structures. And my first question dovetails on Sandy's final question relating to structures that are constructed and allowed under this new regime, but are are left in the street, abandoned, perhaps the business went out. What are you looking at for that? And who is going to be responsible for removing the construction in the street?
So it's Colleen from DOT. So we are keeping track of a list of structures that have been abandoned and where the business obviously closed, the restaurant has closed down. And we're working with other agencies to see what can be done with terms of removal. And again, we haven't, formalized anything yet, but we have a list that we have put together that we are working with our inspectors as well as with other city agencies such as FDNY and Department of Sanitation and OEM.
Okay, similarly, if the structure hasn't been abandoned, but it simply is not being well maintained and is allowed to look derelict, such as being covered with graffiti, even though a restaurant might still be in operation there, are you contemplating rules relating to that?
I mean, we have our team of inspectors that go to locations, again, based on complaints of restaurants that are not in compliance. And if they're not in compliance, they're issued, a notice, and then we would go back out there and do a reinspection.
Now, would graffiti be one of those issues that fall out of compliance?
I've seen some structures that have graffiti and it's part of the design. So
No, I mean that is a place that's been tagged by a vandal.
I mean, if you have a specific location, Larry, email it to me and I will have an inspector go out there and take a look at the site.
I'm just asking whether under the future regulations, whether this will be an area that is specifically covered.
I would imagine it would be, and there would be stricter enforcement involved. Yeah, under the permanent program, definitely.
Okay, in what way will you involve the Department of Buildings in terms of design of the structures, any standardization and quality control, and also with respect to any heating elements?
So heating elements would be part of FDNY because they have actively been involved in that. In terms of DOB, I think if any structure is attached to a particular building, that's where they would be involved, if it's physically attached.
No, I'm asking whether this program contemplates a unified kind of an appearance, such as we have with the zoning when we have contextual zoning, instead of every structure having rather random appearance one next to another.
Right. And again, we're going to continue, DOT is going to work with all the pertinent agencies on this. I mean, under the temporary program, we did do that. We work with DOB, we work with FDNY, we worked with PD. So that is still going to continue.
So I guess the answer is no, there isn't going to be any neighborhood-wide type of standard appearance.
And again, it goes back to the design elements of the structures. And when we have that, we will share that with the community board, and I will get back to the board in terms of input.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Larry. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I just had a couple of concerns, really. Generally, I think that the roadbed sidewalk cafes have been an excellent boon for restaurants, but it is interesting to see the wide variety of them that we see across our neighborhoods in our landmark and non-landmark districts as well, and the forms that they take in terms of full enclosure with like double planed windows and heating and cooling elements, and what sort of compliance they are in. My biggest concern here is, I think what's been expressed is that they will get a letter if they're non-compliant, but there really hasn't been a mechanism to make them compliant or to have them part contextually appropriate to everything else going on in architecture, in design, in neighborhood look and feel. So I am concerned that there needs to be greater enforcement and strategic oversight on how these interrelate to the community around them. So I definitely would argue that there should be a broader approach that engages community boards more actively in the entire permitting process, as well as any sort of poor form or lack of compliance therein.
Thanks. We'll definitely consider that.
And I would just add that, you know, the Landmarks Preservation Committee was involved with our environmental review and with the rollout of the permanent roadway cafe program and the elements that will be part of that.
Still doesn't seem adequate, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sandro. I have one more question, and then if there are no others from the committee, I'm gonna open it up to the floor. Up, Gene, go ahead, Gene.
Thank you. I just wanted to underline this, make sure I got it right. As you're coordinating with the various agencies, DOT, once this is transferred from DCP to DOT as the agency with the authority over the program.
Department of Consumer Workforce Protection.
Excuse me?
So city planning just had zoning, and that was like one step in the process. The Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection, they ran the Sidewalk Cafe program.
Okay, no, I wasn't.
The zoning text amendment is removing city planning from that, and will also transfer the Sidewalk Cafe program to DOT. That's the eventual hope, so that when restaurants apply for outdoor dining, whether it's a roadway cafe or a sidewalk cafe, they will be going to DOT for it.
Right. That's a very good answer, but it wasn't my question. I appreciate it. What I was asking was that as DOT is coordinating with these various agencies, whether it's NYPD, FD, DSNY, et cetera, I'm assuming that as you guys gather the rules together and all agree on the joint rules and regs that are going to be promulgated for this new form, that there will be a single inspector or inspection group that will be coming around to check and enforce that the businesses are actually living up to the codes that you're promulgating, as opposed to early on, as you guys were throwing things at the wall, just trying to make this work. I know that there were some restaurants that felt sort of harassed because somebody from the fire department would come by, somebody from DOT would come by, somebody from another agency would come by, and they'd get different things. And I'm just curious about that part of the enforcement. It would be one unified enforcement thing.
Sort of. There's a few things, and then I think I should let Colleen probably chime in as well. So right now, there's an emergency program that was created through a suspension of rules and zoning. Right. We're working on rolling out a permanent program that won't really go live until the end of 2022 or early 2023. We hope to have lots of sort of more rules, guidance, as well as teeth as agencies on enforcement and design and what restaurants are allowed to do. So under the emergency program, restaurants currently self-certify, and DOT takes that information in, they build something, DOT inspectors then go out and examine the structures to see if it even matches what they had put in on the self-certification. And they tend to get warnings and guidance, and we're working with restaurants to make sure that they're trying to comply with the current rules. In the future program, these restaurants will have to apply to DOT before they really build a structure, or have to show how they can bring their emergency program structure into compliance to the permanent program, and they would have to get approval really before they build that. So DOT will be enforcing sort of what the structures look like, are they built, what was applied to, and do they match all that. NYPD would still be sort of the first enforcement if someone complained late at night, if someone was a bad actor and there was quite loud. So they would respond to that. But other than that, the DOT inspectors will hopefully catch a lot of this prior to them sort of being built or rolled out or accepted into the permanent program.
Okay, great, Ben. Thanks. That's really what my question was. I appreciate it.
Ben answered it all.
Pretty much. Yes. Thanks, Colleen.
All right, Letty, floor is yours.
Yes, and just following up what Jean is talking about, will DOT be expanding their enforcement division, and where are those people in budget going to come from?
So we are going to be expanding our enforcement. We are going to be hiring new staff for the open restaurant. So that is happening as we speak. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Letty. All right, so I have one last question, and if there's no others from the committee, and I'm then going to open it up to the general public. All right, so is there been any regard for licensing fees for the curbside at all within? Yep, I see Jose shaking his hand. Yep. Do you care to speak more to that?
Well, I mean, I can let DOT answer that, but I believe there will be licenses and fee for part of this application process.
Okay.
Yes,
I think
there
yeah,
will
go
be.
ahead, Colin.
There will be fees associated with issuing the permits for the structures. That's correct.
And I guess
I just to add some context to that. So when Department of Consumer and Workforce Protection ran the program, there was fees. I believe they still have that sort of information still on their website, and it's based a lot on size. We haven't decided on exactly how the fee structure will be yet. That's still being worked out, but we do see that, what's happening right now is restaurants can apply free of charge, and they are allowed to self-certify. In the future program, they will both have to apply and prove that they meet the guidelines, as well as pay a fee. So we do expect that, like right now, what you see in the emergency program is really like the height of open restaurants. In the future program, we don't necessarily expect as many restaurants to participate, though we hope they do if they meet all the guidelines.
thank you. And then Sandy, you have the last question, then we're going to turn it into the public.
And sorry, I just noticed that Ben, you said we. So does that mean that DCP is participating in the development?
Good slip of tongue. I've been working on this for a year. It will be DOT. We, the city, is how I was.
Okay. I mean, I think it would be fantastic if we had a DCP portion to developing these rules. And I guess just one other thing, we've seen some of the presentations to other boards where, for instance, they've talked about seasonality, and that the fact that any of these structures would have to be removable, which you really didn't discuss today. I understand you don't want to get too far into the weeds on this discussion, but I think that it would be reassuring for people to know that that's one of the concerns that you do have.
It is, Sandy, it is something that we are looking at as well, of this being seasonal. And again, with the designs of the structures, that we have to take a careful examination in terms of what's being built and how it's being built, because we want the structures, again, to be easily removed, during the winter.
Thank you. So we're now going to open it up to the general public. So I see many people have, all right, Lou, you're the last one, and then we're going to open it to the general public. Oh, you're on mute now, Lou. You're on mute. There you go. Nope. You're on mute again. Sorry, Lou.
Is there any possibility that some kind of sunset could be built into this program so that there's a systematic review from time to time to see how it's working in each community board neighborhood or some other mechanism so that we can find out if there's been a good design to make this operate well?
That's a good question. And I don't want to speak entirely for Colleen, but just having gone to a lot of these meetings and worked with DOT on this project, restaurants will be, right now, the city's contemplating that the restaurants will be sort of reviewed annually. So if there was a lot of complaints or other issues, maybe a secret expansion, that the DOT would be able to sort of review that annually and look at it. So there will be annual inspections of that. And as far as rolling out, Sidewalk Cafe review is mandated by the city charter. So the community board will still have the ability to review these sidewalk cafes as restaurants go to apply for them in the permanent program.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to turn it over to the public. And so I see several people who have already posted in the Q&A. And so I'm going to call on those folks first. And then if you haven't posted in the Q&A and you would like to give a 3-minute testimony, feel free to click on the raise hand function. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the Q&A. I'm going to call your name. We'll call on you. If you'd like me to read the statement, I'm happy to do it. Or if you'd like it, you have your own 3 minutes, we will defer to you as well. So however you'd like to do it. The city team, I know that Michael here and also Joan, I think, have some specific sort of questions that they would like to, I think, service be addressed. So if you could take note of those, I think less so for the public testimony and more sort of, I think there's actually specific problems which they have. They'd be greatly appreciated. Okay, Michael, would you like the floor, or I'm happy to read your question?
Hi, thank you very much. This is Michael Ann Rowe from a chair, I'm a trustee with the Murray Hill Neighborhood Association. Thank you very much for putting this meeting together. It's so important for us to support the restaurant industry. I'm the chair of the Green and Clean Committee. I have a meeting coming up this Thursday about keeping Murray Hill clean. And one of the notes was already addressed by Lawrence, and thank you very much. It's just about these abandoned structures that went up, and you can see they probably tried to make a go at it, which is great, but unfortunately it didn't work out, and these structures are abandoned and they've become pits for homeless people and garbage, and it's obviously unsightly and unsafe for the community. So we'd love to see these be taken down as soon as possible, and I'd love to get some kind of sense of timeline on that if we do report it, and where I need to report it. I don't have an email for you, Colleen, or whomever I'm supposed to report that to.
Hi, Michael. I will put my email information in the chat, and if you can send me the addresses of the structures and the name, I'll be happy to have an inspector go to the site, okay?
Fantastic, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Joan, the floor is now yours. I see that you said that you'd like to speak, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've been in contact with through 311 and then with your office and also with Keith Power's office about what I consider the really egregious, there is no way of passing operations on 2nd Avenue on between 50th and 51st. That is true for what you're talking about, which is the construction and sort of laying out the geography of these things. But in addition, there is a noise factor from people standing in large groups drinking on the sidewalk, in the street, on those locations. I'm not sure that you're realizing just exactly everything you're opening up when you're taking away what little zoning protection we have, that's an avenue, but there are people that actually live there too. So just shout out from watching this and watching nothing get better about it in spite of repeatedly bringing it up. I did want to make sure I had a statement in that to say that to you. You're taking away what little protection we have against noise and this crowds and drinking and shouting, and really in a pandemic, unsafe conditions. The other thing is, I have reported dangerous conditions, particularly in Tudor City, where you have an extension, not just in front of the restaurant, but across the bridge over 42nd Street, where tables with utensils, glasses, bottles are right along an area where it could fall off onto passing pedestrians. There's a bus stop underneath it, and it's 42nd Street. Again, there's not been any remediation. I don't know. DOT, maybe they just don't think it's important, but usually we have to have a sidewalk shed when you have that kind of a danger. I don't know what you think you're doing and taking away our protections. But if you're relying on the DOT to enforce, they have proven they are not able to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Gail, the floor is yours. I'm happy to read your statement.
Please go ahead and read. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Gail. Okay, how does this coordinate with other sidewalk obstructions such as sidewalk sheds, tech kiosks, trees, lampposts, bike stands, extra large trash bins, etc.? And what is / would be the protocol for restaurants with non-restaurant neighbors commandeering additional sidewalk space?
So under the new rules, we are going to be carefully looking at what currently exists there. Obviously, if you have a sidewalk shed, you know, you may not be permitted to have a structure, you know, on the sidewalk or maybe in the roadbed. Again, it depends. We look to see if there's any street furnitures that might be in the way. For example, a city bike rack station. We had received lots of calls about restaurants who had initially set up in areas that were too close to the stations. And of course, they had to remove their setup. So I think a lot of attention is going to be, you know, paid in terms of, you know, what is out there, you know, the amenities and the proximity, and especially with details to clearance of the pathway.
Thank you. Okay, and Sarah's question will be the last from the Q&A. And if there are any members of the public who would still like to speak before we convene as a committee to discuss the resolution, please raise your hand. And I'll call on you if you do so. Okay, all right, Sarah's question, or rather comment, is I want to voice my support for this amendment to make it easier to allow more sidewalk and road rack cafes and outdoor seating, and to do anything else that we can help to support restaurants. My husband and I moved to a co-op in Community Board 6 in February 2020, just before the pandemic, partially so that we could be close to so many dining options, and it has been so disheartening to see our community suffering. The expansion of outdoor dining and to-go drinks were a welcome measure that helped the restaurant business we love and allowed us to dine with less risk to our health. We want to keep this area vibrant and to help support the restaurant and local economy as much as we can. We love outdoor dining and do what I can to make it last in New York City. We don't care about graffiti. In fact, I think it can add some charm. We just want to keep New York City vibrant and our restaurants open and people employed. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, Thank you all for your comments. So now the committee will deliberate our response. Gene.
Yeah, I'd like to jump right off the bat to the CB5 reso that you sent around for us to look at, because I think that's a really good model for us to emulate and maybe tweak in different ways that we need. But for me, the best thing it does is it accomplishes two main things. One is that it directly addresses the main thing we're looking at tonight, which is the movement from DCP to DOT of this entire program. That's really what this text amendment is about. And then it further goes on to the other kind of consequences of that, which we've all discussed and raised questions about, which is what kind of input, feedback, and stuff like that we should have going forward as the new rules, regulations, et cetera, are formulated and promulgated. So I just want to throw that out there for the committee's delectation and amusement and consideration.
Sandy.
I mean, I think we probably all would agree that expanding the areas where cafes are appropriate or can be used in the city is fine. I would say we probably all agree with that. And I guess I know the CB5 resolution, it stressed accessibility, which I think we definitely want to stress as well. I think they also stress the multiple use of the streets. So bike lanes, making sure that everybody was accommodated. One of the things they didn't address that I feel really strongly about and that we've talked about here this evening is, context and aesthetics. I know there's really no way that we can control this. I don't think there's any method or any history of having aesthetics be reviewed by a city agency unless it's the Public Design Commission. But I think it's something that's very important, and maybe we should also try and address that in whatever it is that we do. I also thought seasonal use, we see all these propane heaters. It completely goes against any kind of idea of sustainability that the city is trying to address. So I'd also like to include that in any of our comments. That's it.
Thank you. Sorry, Kavitha.
Just another point about, jumping off from that aesthetics point of view. I was thinking about the materials and whether there's any requirements within those. I know that there's been kind of a scarcity of lumber and materials happening when everybody was building these outdoor structures. But I also wonder if we can incorporate some measures of recycling, sustainability, just kind of lay out that within the guidelines so that these things aren't built and then abandoned and wasted in a way.
Right. I mean, from my perspective, in terms of reviewing these materials in the presentation, so there's sort of the task at hand that's reviewing the text amendment that exists, and then there's the separate rules and regulations that will DOT and co will develop. And I think a lot of these things I think should be bundled together in terms of that discussion. And I think there's a lot of these points that do bring have a lot of merit. And I think we're going to have to lean on our electeds. We're going to have to use sort of our soapbox as a board, just kind of push for what we want to see outdoor dining to become. I think in terms of just a simple sort of review for this, I don't know, I'm sort of a little, the simpler, the better in terms of this instance. And then the respective committees or future resolutions from this committee, I think can address those, in full force. Sandro and then Larry.
Yeah, I think you make an excellent point, Adam. I don't think we're going to be able to drive all the way down into the the minutia of how these get erected and look. But I think it is important for us to stress a few different things. We of course want to enable the use of space for people to eat and people to have an opportunity to conduct their business. But at the same time, I think we want to make sure that it doesn't inhibit other uses, and that would include, as was mentioned before, making sure that we have still the capacity for pedestrian or bicycle or vehicular traffic, that those are not impeded. And I would add to that there is, again, some awareness of the context, both aesthetically, but also in terms of noise mitigation and any other concerns that we can kind of create a envelope here that is essentially an extension of an interior business, but doesn't have a disconnection contextually with the business or the community that it's in.
Thank you.
I would just want to include some language in the final resolution.
Okay. Larry, the floor is yours.
I'm in agreement with Sandro that while what you say, Adam, is central to the resolution, the zoning text itself, we do have a soapbox here where we have an opportunity to lead the discussion that the folks who are coming up with the regulations ought to keep in mind. And we'll come back to these issues, but they need to hear this in advance so that they can design something then that we could approve.
Thank you, Larry. Lou, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, to pick up on what Larry said, I think we ought to ask that there be either a sunset clause in this or a regularly scheduled thorough review, perhaps every 18 months, every year, something like that, so that the intention of the program is not lost with the passage of time.
Thank you. In terms of so again, in terms of the zoning, so there's the zoning text amendment, which we're supposed to sort of comment directly, and there's sort of the things that the ancillary things that we want to see from it. And so from these comments, like these wouldn't be able to, this wouldn't change the language of the zoning text, right? Like it would just be within the regulations. So CV5 in their resolution, they were supportive of the zoning text amendment as presented, and they were basically say within a sentence or two that they wanted to sort of still play an active role in terms of the review, and sort of kept these things, I think, which are real, I think are important, kind of at a broad level, just for the time being, just for this process. And basically they want the agencies to work with the board, and they want the board to be an active partner in the future program in terms of the administration of it going forward.
Precisely where my thinking is going, and I think that's a pretty good way to start in that direction.
Yeah. So do we have anybody that wants to make a motion in terms of a resolution, or?
I'll make a resolution or the start of one.
Okay, okay, go ahead.
Move a resolution of no objection, subject to the conditions and limitations that we discussed as part of this review of the proposal.
Gene.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. The same language, just basically let's essentially adopt the something like the CB5 reso and tweak it. It does divide the things into the process here that we're looking at into two separate parts, which is what it's about. One is the text resolution, the text amendment itself, and the other is what's coming up. And again, we definitely want to be part of that discussion. We want to have our views known. We want the community's views known. So I think we can make that clear, as Adam suggested, in just a few phrases without getting too far into the weeds, which aren't even there yet because we don't know, and neither does anybody else, exactly what these things are going to be. We do have some things we want. We can state those. But primarily, I think it should be pretty straightforward, and in the way that I think CB5 did a great job. And I think also for the sake of a certain amount of solidarity, since we're sharing a lot of corridor space with them up and down the island, it might be useful to join forces with them that overtly in terms of the language.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam.
Was that a second? Or is that
was Sandra's
something?
idea.
Okay, all right.
Second.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we're gonna take a vote.
Okay. So when I call your name, please say whether you are in favor, opposed, or abstain. Adam Harkey.
In favor.
Molly Hollister.
In favor.
Kavitha Matthew.
In favor.
Sandy McKee.
In favor.
Wells McGalley.
In favor.
Gene Santoro.
In favor.
Larry Shire.
In favor.
Lou Sapersky. I think you are on mute.
In favor.
Sandra Sherrod.
In favor.
Letty Simon.
In favor.
Okay, so with 10 in favor, nobody opposed, nobody abstaining, the resolution passes.
Thank you very much, Brendan, and thank you all to the committee members, and thank you to the presenters from the city agencies, both DOT and DCP. Thank you for meeting underneath these circumstances. We greatly appreciate your time, and we look forward to working with you more on this very important subject. We'd also like to extend a thank you to the members of the public who voiced their concerns. Again, if you didn't get what you needed from the city agencies, I know some pop their emails in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to them as you see necessary. Okay, and with that said, I think I should have said this maybe 10 minutes ago. The public hearing on a citywide zoning text amendment, application number N2104344ZRY is now closed. Thank you very much, everyone. I greatly appreciate it.
Adam,
Okay.
Adam, can it be stated for the record who is writing this resolution?
Yeah, that's a good point. Do we have any takers? I mean, I'm happy to do it.
I'll join as
Okay.
well with you.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So it will be Adam and Sandra working jointly.
That's right.
Okay. And just a reminder, it was voted on as a resolution of no objection. So that is one of the selections for the DCP portal. So it does have to reflect that language.
Will do. All right. Thank you. Okay. So now we essentially have two and a half more items. So we have the chair's report. Then we have old and new business. Again, let me extend a big thank you to you all for meeting in the special meeting in August. I cannot express enough how much work the board staff did in order to get us to this point. It was a huge lift. It was a lot of sort of back and forth and things of that nature. But I think in the end, this is the best format. It is transparent, it is safe, and allows for maximum participation. So thank you all for your patience, and thank you for meeting in August. So I have a couple updates for everybody. Okay. I'd like to actually introduce Ann Chen. So Ann is a member of the AIA 2021 AIA Civic Leadership Program, which Kavitha is one of the main people who runs this program. She connected myself with Ann, and her colleague a few weeks ago, and Anne, through her leadership program, is working on community board and ULURPs and general public participation in these sort of weighty and meaty issues. And did they pick a great time to sort of come and hang out with us for a meeting? You know, I believe this is our 5th or 6th ULURP in the span of 4 months. And so it's been quite impressive what you as a committees rather, have been able to do in that span of time. You know, these are major important issues that have affected our city, and, you know, again, a tip of the cap to everybody and all the work that you've done. And thank you, Anne, for being able to join us this evening. I hope that you learned a lot. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I have some ESCR updates for you guys. So I'm not sure if you saw there was a news article a few weeks ago about Scott Stringer not signing the certificate of application for the Project Area 1. I believe that's all been settled now, and everything in Project Area 1 is now moving forward. And so that should be, they've been doing preliminary work now for a few weeks. So if you've been in East River Park, below the pinch point, you might have seen some trees being worked on, some equipment being set up, some surveying things, a lot of the preliminary work. We were hoping that they could come to this meeting, but however, due to the circumstances, we're hoping that they can come to the September meeting to update us of what's going on in Project Area 2 and Project Area 1 south of the district. In addition to that, I'm not sure if you're aware, but New Wave Park has opened. This is the pier, the Con Ed Pier. It has 1,001 different names, but Department of Parks and Recreation is calling it New Wave Pier. And so what they've done is, over the past few weeks, they've laid down AstroTurf, put down picnic tables, and have some whimsical signs all throughout the pier. I highly encourage you to go check it out if you haven't seen it. It's definitely interesting. It's a lot of people are responding and reacting to it, just good. For this particular item, Kevin will have that team in addition to the regular parks team, and they'll be discussing the turf and other ESCR mitigations within the Parks Department meeting, or excuse me, not Parks Department, the Parks Committee meeting next Monday on the 30th. I believe that's at 7 p.m. So Sarah from Parks will be able to talk specifically with the New Wave Pier, and Wes will be able to talk about the general turfing projects you might have seen throughout the district, like at Safe Farms Park, Robert Moses, you know, et cetera. I think, one particular point of note, umbrellas will be coming at some point. They were hampered by supply chain issues, but I think we're gonna, hopefully they can expedite that, because that's a major component of that design. So, but anyway, if you want to talk more about that or hear more about that, I encourage you to attend next Monday's Parks meeting. And then finally, I wanted to break some personal news to you guys. I'm not sure, some might be aware, some might not be. So I have some personal news. And so long and short is, I will be stepping down as chair, basically after full board. In short, I accepted a new position within the MTA, very excited. And so I'll be focusing my energies directly to that. More to follow on that in the not too distant future. And also on a personal, more personal news, my wife and I will be expecting a baby girl in late October. So I will be taking a general leave of absence from then. So we knew one was going to happen, wasn't really sure about the other one. So anyway, a bundle of sort of personal news on my end. And so anyway, I just wanted to say my time as chair, I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed working with you all very personally. Again, like, I think you've done a tremendous job underneath the circumstances. You know, you've served your community, and you've weighed in on these very meaty issues. I might be one of the only chairs ever to serve only via Zoom. So you please insert any sort of Gerald Ford references or anything like that as you see fit. But, you know, one of the things I'm hoping to do sort of with as we raise our daughter, I hope to sort of instill her with the civic pride and sort of the things that, you know, I think each and every one of you sort of exhibit, you know, personally and on a professional level, you know, and so no New York City drop dead, no, not from her. So anyway, I just want to say it was a pleasure to serve with you all, and look forward to updating you guys with some good news. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the soapbox and continue to do some great work. You'll be in great hands, and I think Kyle and others will sort of decide what the future will bring in the next couple of weeks in terms of this committee, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so that was a lot, huh? So anywho, any old or new business? Sandra.
Yeah, congratulations, Adam.
Oh,
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everything you've done for this committee, for the community. You've been an outstanding steward of it. We really appreciate everything you've done through that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra.
I don't know what to think about this.
Okay. Just a member of the public sharing their gratitude. So thank you. Okay. Gene.
Yeah, no, I just wedged my comment in there before Sandro because Sandro had his hand up. But yeah, I agree. I mean, you've done an outstanding job, especially as possibly the only chair in CB6 history who served his entire term on Zoom. Which is not a mean feat. We all had to get used to it, and you did a fabulous job. And also, the 5 ULURPs in whatever it was, 2-3 months, I've lost track. I'm brain dead. I think that's probably got to be some kind of city record. I think we should probably push to get you a certificate from the city council just for having survived, navigating all those things successfulully. So we can try to work on that, I think, going forward. Sandra's laughing, so maybe he'll work with me on it.
Well, if I get a certificate, we all get a certificate. This was definitely a group effort. So, Kavitha, thank you, Gene.
Just a third congratulations. And thank you for being the calm under all this pressure with all the ULURPs and all the things that were going on amidst a pandemic. We really appreciate it. And, I just want to say good luck with everything.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Larry.
Adam, thank you for being a steady hand on the tiller. Best of luck with the new family, and all good things for you.
Thank you very much, Larry. I appreciate it. Thank you. Letty.
I just want to wish you the best. Wish you the best.
Thank you very much, Letty. I was worried there for a second. I was worried that I froze, and I was like, that would be really odd, Okay. Okay. All right. Well,
can I make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I will accept that. Yes.
Or are we still at it?
Yes, absolutely.
Before we do that, I'd like to say amen to all of the praise and fond commentary in your behalf, Adam.
Thank you very much, Lou. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. I've done it so many times, I really forget. Do I accept a second, or do I say so moved?
Here's a second if you need one. There you go.
Thanks. There, we got 2. So for the record. All right. Okay, so that's it. All right, so the meeting is adjourned at 8:10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, thank you all for all the great work that you've done this evening, and thank you all for the very heartfelt